1. From my grandfather Verus I learned to relish the beauty of manners, and to restrain all anger. From the fame and character my father obtained, modesty, and a manly deportment. Of my mother, I learned to be religious, and liberal, and to guard, not only against evil actions, but even against any evil intentions entering my thoughts, to content myself with a spare diet, far different from the softness and luxury so common among the wealthy. Of my great-grandfather, not to frequent public schools and auditories, but to have good and able teachers at home, and for things of this nature, to account no expense too great. 2. He who had the charge of my education, taught me not to be fondly attached to any of the contending parties in the chariot races, or in the combats of the gladiators. He taught me also to endure labor, not to need many things, to serve myself, without troubling others, not to intermeddle with the affairs of others, and not easily to admit of accusations against them. 3. Of Diognetus, not to busy myself about vain things, not to credit the great professions such as pretending to work wonders, or of sorcerers, about their charms, and their expelling demons, and the like. Not to keep quails, nor to be keen on such things, to allow others all freedom in conversation, and to apply myself heartily to philosophy. Him also I must thank, for my hearing first Bacchius, then Tandisus, and Marcianus, that I wrote dialogues in my youth, and took a liking to the philosopher's little couch and skins, and such other things, which by the Grecian discipline belong to that profession. 4. To Rusticus I owe my first apprehensions, that my temper needed redress and cure, and that I did not fall into the ambition of the common sophists, either in writing upon the sciences, or exhorting men to philosophy by public harangues, as also, that I never affected to be admired by ostentation of great patience in an ascetic life, or of activity and application, and that I gave over the study of rhetoric, poetry, and the elegance of language, that I did not affect any airs of grandeur, by walking at home in my senatorial robe, or by any such things. I also observed the simplicity of style in his letters, particularly in that, which he wrote to my mother from Sinuessa. I learned also from him an easiness and proneness to be reconciled and well pleased again with those who had offended me, as soon as any of them inclined to be reconciled, to read with diligence, not to rest satisfied with a light and superficial knowledge, nor quickly to assent to great talkers. Him also I must thank, that I met with the discourses of Epictetus which he gave me. 5. From Apollonius I learned true liberty, and invariable steadfastness, and to regard nothing else, not even in the smallest degree, but right and reason, and always to remain the same man, whether in the sharpest pains, or after the loss of a child, or in long diseases. To him I owe my seeing in a living example, that it was possible for the same man to be both vehement and remiss, as occasion required. I learned of him, not to fret when my reasonings were not apprehended. In him I saw an instance of a man, who esteemed his excellent skill and ability in teaching others the principles of philosophy, the least of all his endowments. Of him also I learned how to receive from friends, what are thought favors, so as neither to be on that account subjected to them, nor yet seem insensible and ungrateful. 6. From Sextus a pattern of a benign temper, and of a family, governed with true paternal affection and a steadfast purpose of living according to nature, to be grave and venerable, without affectation, to observe sagaciously the several dispositions and inclinations of my friends, not to be offended with the ignorant, or with those who follow the vulgar opinions without examination. His conversation was an example, how a man may accommodate himself to all men and companies, for though his company was sweeter and more pleasing than any sort of flattery, yet he was at the same time highly respected and reverenced. No man was ever more happy than he in comprehending, finding out, and arranging in exact order the great maxims necessary for the conduct of life. He taught me by his example to suppress even the least appearance of anger, or any other passion, but still, notwithstanding this perfect tranquility, to possess the tenderest and most affectionate heart, and to be apt to approve and applaud others, and yet without noise, to desire much literature, without ostentation. 7. From Alexander the critic, to avoid censuring others, or flouting at them for a barbarism, solecism, or any false pronunciation, but dexterously to pronounce the words as they ought, in my answering, approving, or arguing the matter, without taking direct notice of the mistake, or by some other such courteous insinuation. 8. From Fronto, to be sensible, how much envy, deceit, and hypocrisy surrounds princes, and that generally those we account nobly born, have somehow less natural affection. 9. Of Alexander the Platonist, not often, nor without great necessity, to say, or write to any man in a letter, that I am not at leisure, nor thus under pretext of urgent affairs, to decline or defer the duties, which, according to our various ties, we owe to those among whom we live. 10. Of Catulus, not to contemn any friend's expostulation, though unjust, but to strive to reduce him to his former disposition, freely and heartily to speak well of all my masters, upon any occasion, as it is reported of Domitius and Athenodotus, and to love my children with true affection. 11. From my brother Severus, to love my kinsmen, and to love truth and justice. To him I owe my acquaintance with Rusticus, Helvidius, Cato, Dion, and Brutus. He also gave me the first conception of a republic, founded upon equitable laws, and administered with equality of right, and of a monarchic government, which chiefly regards the liberty of the subjects. From him I learn likewise, to maintain a constant, disengaged, and uninterrupted study and esteem of philosophy, to be bountiful and liberal in the largest measure, always to hope the best, and to be suspicious about the affections of my friends. I observed in him a candid openness in declaring what he disliked in the conduct of others, and that his friends might easily see, without the trouble of conjectures, what he liked or disliked, so open and plain was his behavior. 12. From Claudius Maximus, in all things to have power over myself, and in nothing to be hurried away by any passion, to be cheerful and courageous in all sudden accidents, as in sicknesses to have an easy command of my own temper, to maintain a kind, sweet, and yet grave deportment, to execute my designs vigorously without fretting. Whatever he said, all men believed, he spoke, as he thought, and that whatever he did, it was with a good intent. He taught me, not to be easily astonished or confounded with anything, never to seem in a hurry, nor yet to be dilatory, or perplexed, without presence of mind, or dejected, fretful, angry, or suspicious, and to be ready to do good to others, to forgive, and to speak truth, and in all this, to appear rather like one who had always been straight and right, than ever rectified or redressed, nor was there any who thought himself undervalued by him, or who could find in his heart to think himself a better man than him, nor did he ever affect the praise of being witty. 13. From my father I learned meekness and constancy, without wavering in those things, which after a due examination and deliberation were determined, to be little solicitous about the common honors, patience of labor, and assiduity, and readiness to hear any man, who offered anything tending to the common good, an inflexible justice toward all men, a just apprehension when rigor and extremity, or when remissness and moderation were in season, abstinence from all impure lusts, and a sense of humanity toward others. Thus he left his friends at liberty, to sup with him or not, to go abroad with him or not, as they inclined, and they still found him the same, after their affairs had hindered them to attend him. I learned of his accuracy and patience of inquiry in all deliberations and counsel. He never quitted the search, satisfied with the first appearances. I observed his zeal to retain his friends, without cloying them, or showing any foolish fondness, his contentment in every condition, his cheerfulness, his forethought about very distant events, his exact care even about small matters, without noise. How he restrained all acclamations and flattery, how vigilantly he observed all things necessary to the government, and managed accurately the public revenue, and bore patiently the censures of others about these things, how he was neither a superstitious worshipper of the gods, nor an ambitious pleaser of men, nor studious of popularity, but sober in all things, steadfast, well skilled in what was honorable, never affecting novelties. As to these things which are subservient to ease and convenience, of which his fortune supplied him with great affluence, he used them without pride, and yet with all freedom, enjoyed them without affectation when they were present, and when absent, he found no one of them. He was not celebrated either as a learned acute man, or one of a sharp wit, or as a great declaimer, but a wise, experienced, complete man, one who could not bear to be flattered, able to govern both himself and others. I further observed the great honor he paid to all true philosophers, without upbraiding those who were not so, his sociableness, his gracious and delightful conversation, without cloying, his regular moderate care of his body, neither like one desirous of long life, or over studious of neatness and elegance, and yet not as one who despised it. Thus, through his own care, he seldom needed any internal medicines, or outward applications, but especially how ingeniously he would yield without envy, to any who had obtained any peculiar faculty, as either eloquence, or the knowledge of the laws, or of ancient customs, or the like, and how he concurred with them strenuously, that every one of them might be regarded and esteemed, for that in which he excelled, and although he observed carefully the ancient customs of his forefathers, yet it was without ostentation. Again, how he was not fickle and capricious, but loved to continue both in the same places and businesses, and how after his violent fits of the headache, he returned fresh and vigorous to his wonted affairs. Again, that he neither had many secrets, nor often, and such only as concerned public matters, his discretion and moderation, in exhibiting shows for the entertainment of the people, in public buildings, largesses, and the like. In all these things he acted like one who regarded only what was right and becoming in the things themselves, and not the applause which might follow. He never bathed at unseasonable hours, had no vanity in building, was never solicitous either about his meat, or about the nice workmanship or color of his clothes, or about the beauty of his servants. His apparel was plain and homely, such as that he chose to wear at Lorium, cloth made at Lanuvium, and at Tusculum, he wore a short cloak, sometimes making apologies for the plainness of his dress. His conversation was far from any inhumanity, or incivility, or impetuosity, never doing anything with such keenness that one could say he was sweating about it, but on the contrary, in all things, he acted distinctly, as at leisure, without confusion, regularly, resolutely, and gracefully. A man might have applied that to him which is recorded of Socrates, that he knew both how to abstain from or enjoy those things, in want whereof most men show themselves weak, and in the fruition, intemperate, he remained firm and constant in both events, with a just self-government, and showed a perfect and invincible soul, such as appeared in him during the sickness of Maximus. 14. To the gods I owe my having good grandfathers, and parents, a good sister, good masters, good domestics, affectionate kinsmen, and friends, and almost all things good, and that I never through haste and rashness offended any of them, though I had such a temper as might have led me to it, had occasion offered, but by the goodness of the gods, no such concurrence of circumstances happened as could discover my weakness, that I was not long brought up with my father's concubine, that I retained my modesty, and refrained from all venereal enjoyments, even longer than was necessary, that I lived under the government of such a prince and father, who took away from me all pride and vainglory, and convinced me that it was not impossible for a prince to live in a court, without guards, extraordinary apparel, torches, statues, or such pieces of state and magnificence, but that he may reduce himself almost to the state of a private man, and yet not become more mean or remiss in those public affairs, wherein power and authority are requisite. That I have had such a brother, as by his disposition might stir me up to take care of myself, and yet by his respect and love delighted me, that my children wanted not good natural dispositions, nor were distorted or deformed in body, that I was no great proficient in the studies of rhetoric and poetry, and in other faculties, which might have engrossed my mind, had I found myself successful in them, that I prevented the expectations of those, by whom I was brought up, in promoting them to the places and dignities they seemed most to desire, that I did not put them off, in the common way, with hopes and excuses that since they were but young I would do it hereafter. I owe to the gods that ever I knew Apollonius, Rusticus and Maximus, that I have had occasion often and effectually to meditate with myself and inquire what is truly the life according to nature, so that, as for the gods, and such suggestions, helps and inspirations, as might be expected from them, I might have already attained to that life which is according to nature, and it was my own fault that I did not sooner, by not observing the inward motions and suggestions, and almost plain and apparent instructions of the gods, that my body, in such a life, hath been able to hold out so long, that I never had to do with Benedicta and Theodotus, and afterwards, when I fell into some foolish passions, that I was soon cured, that, having been often displeased with Rusticus, I never did anything to him, for which afterwards I had occasion to repent, that since it was my mother's fate to die young, she lived with me all her latter years, that as often as I inclined to succor any who were either poor, or fallen into some distress, I was never answered by the managers of my revenues that there was not ready money enough to do it, and that I myself never had occasion for the like succor from any other, that I have such a wife, so obedient, so loving, so ingenuous, that I had choice of fit and able men, to whom I might commit the education of my children, that by dreams I have received divine aids, as, for other things, so, in particular, how I might stay my spitting of blood, and cure my vertigo, which happened successfully to me at Cajeta, and that, when I first applied myself to philosophy, I did not fall into the hands of some sophist, nor spent my time in reading many volumes, nor embarrassed myself in the solution of sophisms, nor dwelt upon the study of the meteors. All these things could not have thus concurred, without the assistance of the gods and fortune. These things in the country of the Quadi near Granua,